for coming to Corfu and for having you to join us in ΚΕΔΙΜΑ, in center, in the center. I just see the Vice Rector, Kostas Angelakos, who is joining, maybe. I just already lost him. Anastasia is Professor Anastasia Samaras is a Professor Emerita of Education at the College of Education and Human Development at George Mason University in Virginia. A leader in the
Κυρία Καμπάση, δεν ακούγεσαι καθόλου καλά. Έχει κοπεί η σύνδεση μάλλον.
Professor Samaras Research Centers on Designing and Ακούτε?
Δεν ακουστήκαν όλα πολύ καθαρά, από την αλήθεια.
Okay, can you hear me now? Hello, can you hear me now? Yes, okay. She's a frequent speaker both in the US and globally, and a collaborator on multiple faculty professional development projects and grants. Anastasia seeks to make self-study accessible to teachers and faculty in study and outstudy the teaching profession. She was a Fulbright scholar at the University of Ioannina and served as a delegate to the 2022 Faro Summit. Anastasia, it's a pleasure to have you with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Katarina. Thank you for those able to join. And I appreciate so much all of the coordination and the work it took for so many people to help me to be able to be here to present in person. Some of you might have heard my earlier talk here that was virtual last year, and that is still available, I believe, from the Teaching and Learning Center. But for today, we'll move to the today's presentation. And I'm very fortunate to have Spiros from IT here helping me out, and Lito escorting me around, and so many people, Yanni, Seleni, so many people have really made this possible. I'm very grateful. I also see one of my former students, Yannis, on the Zoom, and I appreciate that because that's a good way to begin, in that my work is very theoretical and yet very practical. And so let us begin. I know that it's the beginning of the semester, so I'm hoping that many of you can view this later. But I really seek to make my work practical. And although I come from a very thinking field theoretically, I have made it a lifetime goal of my profession to enact pedagogically. And I'll talk just a little bit about that with polyvocality, Vygotskian theory, and self-study research, which I've been doing for decades. It's my signature work. But again, to make it practical, I want to share some of the creative methods to cultivate polyvocal conversations, strategy, and then I'll leave you with an example that will be accessible to you later on the video to go through in detail of how we can also use these tools for students. So I'm going to do two pieces. One, to share the work I've been doing with faculty learning communities in polyvocal conversations, and two, to leave you with an example. And of course, the significance of those. So let's get started. So first of all, I couldn't agree with Gertz more that if you really want to understand a theory, you have to look at what practitioners are doing with it. And again, that has been my goal. So let's see what that looks like. So polyvocality, no surprise, it comes from the Greek word, and many voices. Bakhtin called it polyphony. Thank you again, Spiros. We appreciate it. It is not just many voices. The work originally in polyphony came out of the literature where you have diverse voices creating a tapestry, so to speak, in literature. And they come in and out of each other, but they're all a part of a larger story. So it's this plurality where you have these different perspectives of characters that then help to create an alternative viewpoint of the story. And that's what Kathleen Pithouse Morgan and I have been doing. She's one of my critical friends, or a person who has supported my work, and I have supported hers as well. And we've written extensively on and coined this word of polyvocality. And my original work in my Vygotskian-based PhD was actually in early childhood, looking at the importance of, believe it or not, technology with young children, what would happen when the computer came into the classroom, and the teacher's role in that, because my thinking was that computers alone are not going to teach the children. So I come from, and again, it aligns and it complements this polyvocality. I come from the thinking, the theoretical dispositions, that we don't really learn by ourselves. And it's a shame so much I see in higher education that we go into our classrooms and we work so much alone. And the beauty of sharing in dialogue, another ancient Greek concept, really extends an individual's understanding. It offers alternative points of view and a different way of thinking about something in a way that you would never have seen yourself. So those are two of the pieces. And then, of course, the last piece is self-study research, which paradoxically is not done alone. Self-study research requires working collaboratively, and the goal is to improve your professional practice. Although it started with teacher educators, and not in the United States, actually, it extended to other practitioners, because scholars like Kathleen Pithouse Morgan and I really worked to extend it, and realizing that, wow, it can be useful to other people. And way back in my early doctoral teach George Mason University, I had students who were not teacher educators, and I started to realize that this research is applicable to any profession. Anybody who wants to look at what they're doing to get better, or also what they are doing well and how that works. So that's a little bit about self-study research. This is Kathleen and I on one of our conferences, I think maybe in New Zealand, and the book Polyvocal Professional Learning I will leave with the Teaching and Learning Center with Katarina, although I must tell you that I've also shared any of the chapters that I mentioned in today's talk with her in a reading resource folder. Oh, and if you can't find them or you need them, you can always email me at asamaris@georgegmu.edu. And the first two chapters are free on that link if you want them. So again, bringing into dialogue multiple points of view. And we have made this more concise in saying it involves plurality, interaction, and independence. And here's a piece that really is the focus of today's talk: creative activity, co-creative activity. And that really extends the thinking of doing things alone. So moving forward, self-study research, professionals studying their teaching practices, I've said, we call them critical friends. which offer constructive feedback in order to improve your learning, not just for yourself, but it must be for others. And I will also leave the book, the 2011 book with Katerina on self-study research, which again, very practically orients people to this new paradigm. Developed in the 1990s, a postmodern qualitative research paradigm, very different in that the I is actually in the research. How do I improve? So you're not studying others, although you're studying with others. And it's always situated in your own context with critical collaborative inquiry for improved learning. And like any good research, with a transparent and systematic process, and to then share it for validation and peer review in a wider audience. You know, Socrates might have said the unexamined life is not worth living, and I would add the unexamined professional life is not worth living. Indeed, that's been my whole professional career. Although I started with reflective practice and action research, self-study moves way beyond that, in that it's not just about thinking about what you're doing, but it's actually enacting and doing something with your reflection and doing it with others. And not just doing it to change the classroom or to change someone else, but to change the one thing you can change, and that is your own professional practice. So this is a quick slide on self-study that I've referred to, the I question, situated in context, working with colleagues. And it's not something that you have to think about, oh my, at the beginning of the semester, I have so much work to do. How am I going to do this in addition to my other work? Well, the good news is that this is not something that is separate from your teaching or your professional work. So somebody like Katerina could even study her work and facilitating her work at the Teaching Learning Center, the provost, the rector. Each of you, regardless of your professional life, can say, what am I doing? How can I make this better, right? And indeed, I know universities, having been directing many of the accreditation visits, do a self-study of the whole university. And if those groups think in groups of think tanks, in collaborative circles, then that extends the singular focus of accountability, which, of course, I would highly recommend. So the data is already there for you. It's there from your students. You can ask your students for feedback anonymously or after the course is finished and after you put your grades in. It's there for you if you're doing coordinating a meeting and getting notes. It's there for you if you are keeping your own research journal and log, even on a voice memo. The data is not something you need to work very hard to pull up. And largely in universities, the International Review Board accepts and exempts these self-studies because the data largely is of yourself, although I always submit it to validate its exemption. So there's another piece that you can publish, which is a nice little carrot, because in addition to doing your other research, you can submit this to journals that publish the study of teaching. Okay, very briefly, I have helped to facilitate the first, but co-facilitated 5 different cohorts at George Mason University, drawing from our 9 schools and our then the George Mason College of Education. So this was the first group, and they came from very many different fields, including astrophysics and recreation and art history, public health and art, modern languages. It was fascinating. And what I really discovered was I wasn't the only expert in the room. And we met in person and then also in virtually and then also in small groups to dialogue and to have conversations about a study that we each chose, but then we supported each other in the journey of a self-study project. We published many pieces from that as well. So your publications don't have to be singular, they can be collaborative. And after the first group, I did one on teaching with e-learning. You remember when that was a new thing with technology, and also one with visually rich digital tools. I worked with STEM faculty across campus on more interactive teaching in these large lecture halls that they had to work in. Because remember, although we're trained in our content, very few of us actually have been trained in pedagogical scholarship. So as a teacher educator and as a former high school teacher and middle school and then early childhood teacher, I bring that expertise into the scholarship of teaching as well. And so we worked with STEM faculty. And then my last project was a collaborative one where we worked with our adjunct faculty, a population that's often not appreciated and not supported enough. And they worked collaboratively to think about and get support for their teaching. So that's kind of a quick summary. And if you're interested in it, there's articles in the folder that go into much detail. So, okay, what did we do? And as I said, this work largely that I've been doing is arts-based. Of course, qualitative research relies largely on interviews. We do reciprocal interviews, which I'll introduce you to. But I wanted to highlight a few examples that are actually in the book, but ones that might help you to understand what I'm talking about when I say promoting polyvocal learning conversations. And on the right side of the screen is the facts of assessing research quality. People often say, well, how can that be a research if it's subjective? And of course, these are just some of the many ways. And I would question that most research is subjective, even in the hypotheses that you choose, because I was actually trained in quantitative research, and that was my dissertation. So moving forward. This is the first example. Cristina and Esperanza from our modern language program. Esperanza was in the first group that, or the second group that we did with e-learning, because she's very interested in technology and modern languages. And Cristina was her student, but Cristina was also her teaching assistant. So tell me, when you have and work with teaching assistants at Ionian University, what support and instruction do you give them? Do you share your syllabus? Do you show them how to set up the computer? What is the extent of the mentorship that's involved? So they sat down and they had an idea. And they said, well, we've already taught a class face-to-face, but now we're both going to teach it online for the first time. How about we work collaboratively? Now remember, one's a full professor and one is a master's student as a teaching assistant. How can we work to actually support each other's efforts in this new online environment and use digital tools as data? So they said, how about we create a shared private blog, Gmail chat, emails, and then have some face-to-face meetings, and have one of our other former colleagues who is a self-study scholar do an interview with us. And what they found was, although in the beginning it was Professor Mendoza, slowly that hegemony faded and they realized that they were both learning so much in this new environment. And this reciprocal mentorship, which they talk about in the chapter that again is available to you, really demonstrates the evolving shifts in relationship to improve practice. And how does it happen? It happens because there's more than one person in this conversation of learning. So that's one of my favorite examples. The other one is a professor in public health, Laura Palms, who's now a director with the students in their research. And we, in this other cohort of visually rich digital learning, we asked participants to create an artifact of where they were coming from and where they were going to. And in this visual, she said, I want to move from the sage on the stage to the guide on the side. That was her goal. That was her inquiry. How do I, in these large lecture halls, make my teaching more interactive, more polyvocal? How does that work? And so that was her inquiry. And the last example is in the book. This is a chapter from two professors at two different community colleges in Hawaii. And my other dear colleague, Ann Fries at University of Hawaii, was actually their mentor. And both Ann and I have worked a lot with artifacts when we introduce ourselves to our students, we often bring in objects to talk about a little bit about ourselves and ask our students to do the same. A very powerful technology, pedagogical tool. So Hibehu had struggles as seeking tenure as a Native Hawaiian woman. She succeeded, but she also felt less than inclusive. And so she decided that for her dissertation, what she was going to do was she was going to ask other Native Hawaiian women what their experiences were like seeking tenure. And then David, the other David Evans, the other person in this polyvocal conversation, also a higher ed scholar, he was interested in faculty's perceptions of their enjoyment in being in higher ed because of decreased budgets and public images of, oh, you only teach a couple classes and all that kind of stuff. He was very interested also in faculty perceptions. So they each used the artifacts as a form of data. On the left is Hebu's turtle, which is a sea turtle, Honu, that she crafted. And then she asked for stories of each of her participants and asked each of them to create an artifact. And collectively, the turtle on the right is the collective image. So you start to see that when you get outside of only the narrative, sometimes the objects really are quite powerful. And when I was talking to my son, he said, well, Mom, that's very abstract. And he's in IT security. So when I went to visit the castle, the Venetian castle, I saw and took pictures and I said, Luca, here's an example of an artifact for you. They have a moat around it. That's one layer of security. Then you have to go over the bridge. Then you have to go to the next layer and then the next, and then there's a big wall. And that was the perfect artifact for the multiple paths that he has to secure and for his practice as a IT specialist in helping organizations and government organizations like IRS and others to secure their IT security. So sometimes the picture or the object, and there's a lot on object inquiry, tells more than just the words. Now, this slide is a chapter just out, literally like a week ago. So excited. And I have the proof on the folder that I sent to the teaching center. And it's on reclaiming my artistic core, living signature arts-based self-study. And I really, had to think about this journey, this wonderful, I'm so grateful for this professional journey that I've had. And I guess I've always been somehow drawn to the arts, although not trained in it. And of course, always to teaching. And on the left is teaching young children at our church in folk dance, because and part of, as you see me here, and as you see my work, I'm very committed to supporting the work of other Greek scholars, Greek American and Greek, like you. And I really enjoyed this work with young children, and we actually worked all the way up to 18-year-olds. And we had the festivals, and there were, I worked with other teachers and coordinated and directed and whatever. But it was such a beautiful event to see these children doing the Hasatiko and the Tsamiko, and they were learning a part of the story of themselves. Yes, it was beautiful. And of course, I had been a teacher in a public school for many years, and a community college, and very many different adjunct faculty positions, becoming a full professor and a mentor to many, and a very diverse college, as you can see in the middle photo, and with largely students who were working during the day, and then also finding this self-study community. It's a special interest group of the American Educational Research Association, and finding this village that, again, not all in particularly my area, but many of them as teacher educators. And we're meeting at a castle in East Sussex every other year for a wonderful conference. And we've been a very supportive community of each other. And so those were some of my artifacts. And as I said, these are some of the things about me. I'll give you a minute to read that. So if you take the words, if somebody was taking notes of what I just said on the earlier pictures, the artifacts, and you wrote those words down, this is called found poetry. You maybe already know this. And then it really capsulizes so much about academic identity in a very small way. Brief. Always the teacher, drawn towards artistic pedagogies, becoming a teacher, educator, mentor, self-study, a doer, and a methodologist. You see how sometimes the poetry just makes it so concise, as opposed to all that talking that I just did earlier. So let me pause for a second and ask each of you to think about what your artifacts of your identity, academic identity might include. What would your artifacts look like? And if we had the luxury of an hour to sit down and have a conversation about that, what would those artifacts tell us about our work in higher education or wherever you're working? So if you're joining on Zoom, you can also jot down and start to think about those artifacts. So there are specific strategies to promote these polyvocal interactive learning, and I'm going to share a few of them with you. One, as I referred to, is critical friendships, where you construct knowledge through these conversations with a reciprocity and a very trusting and supportive climate. So let's say you wanted to share your artifacts with a colleague or many colleagues. Who would those people be for you? Somebody that you think would be a giver and also be a part of sharing what they're doing and you sharing what you're doing in a way that was non-judgmental and that was supportive, with nobody being in charge, not an outsider evaluating, but a small group of faculty or students working together, where you start to know and care about each other's research as much as your own, and where your way of knowing is extended through these conversations, through this dialogue. There's quite a bit written about that if you're interested in some of the examples and what it looks like in research. And then when I went to South Africa to present, I had the wonderful pleasure of working with a group of 3 theater directors, professors, and they introduced me to reciprocal interviewing, which in the theatrical and the drama world, that's like being in the hot seat, right? Where somebody interviews you and asks you what you're doing, what your research is. And when you talk about it out loud, very much like private speech in the Vygotskian world, you hear it and understand it in a new way, especially if somebody's asking you those questions. So somebody is the interviewer, somebody is the interviewee, and then there are observers taking notes. And then you change places. And those discussions and that reciprocal interviewing is one of the most powerful learning tools that I have used in each of my teaching classes that really take it out of me doing all the talking and them talking to each other, students and also working with faculty, reciprocal interviewing. The other one that I really like is the peer response template, which I really was introduced to doing edited books where we gave each other feedback on our chapters as a way of peer review. But it's a wonderful tool to use with students and with faculty on getting a very quick but powerful response to what your colleague thinks is interesting or significant about what you're doing in this particular writing or artistic piece, and the questions you have that might need clarity. And when I did an asynchronous online class for doctoral students in the international cohort at George Mason, which I taught several years, I was drawn to the idea that it doesn't have to be written. And I asked students to do a video response to each other, just quick, 4 or 5 minutes, do a video response of this proposal for research. And then they'll do one for you. And then they can listen to it, look it over again, and it takes it out of the narrative and gives a little bit of a jazzy video. So I like that. I think that's a good one to use too. And I'm hoping you're thinking about when I'm talking about all this, how it can be useful to you in your teaching and in your work. So I'm going to start this for you here. And what I'm going to encourage you to do is after this talk, to go out, knock on the door of one of your colleagues or email if you're on Zoom and say, can you be my critical friend? And let's try this out. This thing Anastasia introduced us to. Okay? Tatoganis, right? All right. So think about your artifacts. Help us to see your academic identity and your professional journey. And in this reciprocal interview, after you've collected your artifacts, I want you to ask each other, why did you choose those artifacts? Do you see any intersections of your personal and academic identities? And why does your work matter to others? And while you're doing that, take notes. And just like I did with the found poem, take those words and make your own found poem. And then take that poem and tape it in front of your computer. And every day when you go to work, look at it and say, this is who I am right now in my academic identity and my professional journey. And this is where I want to go. I think you'll find it very powerful. I know it's a little risky. I know it's a little out there. I know it might be out of your comfort zone, but trust me, it's a very amazing experience that you don't want to miss. And it doesn't have to be about academic identity. It could be anything. It could be artifacts about whatever you're choosing to study. Okay? Good. Now, there are other collaborative artistic strategies. You see now with technology, there's so many collaborative apps. I had a wonderful experience using Mood Board that actually I was inspired with Kathleen because she worked with designers at University of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. And they would throw swatches of material or ideas up on a board. And then they started to see it in a more visual way of what their project was about. Well, guess what? You can do that with your research too. And I'll show you an example in a minute. There's collage. I've had students who took a famous art piece and said, this really captures my thinking about my research. Rich pictures, which are basically just stick figures. Mini memoirs, which I've been doing quite a bit now. Haiku and many other forms of poetry, tanka, lantern, reader's theater, and even dance. And again, if you're interested in that, this is some of the work I've been doing, largely with Kathleen and my students. And a link on this and this particular chapter where it discusses each of these and gives you the references is available in the folder that I shared with the center. And this is the mood board, the mural. Mural is one of the apps. And this was a piece that we use sticky notes and objects and pictures to think about what our thinking in space would entail. And it was a study of facilitating faculty learning communities, which we published in many different ways. And it was with Kathleen. So that's what it can look like. This was rich pictures that I did with three other colleagues, looking at teaching, where I started with all the desks in a row and then moving more collaboratively. So you see my journey is actually one that I've thought about for a long time, and it's easily depicted in this very, I'm not embarrassed to say stick figures because, hey, it helped me understand it. This is an example of found poetry that Kathleen and I played with in a chapter, a really wonderful article in Educational Forum, Nourishing Wholehearted Faculty Professional Living Through Co-Creative Play. Now, my PhD is actually in early childhood curriculum instruction and teacher ed. And having grandchildren, I also enjoy playing, but I play in my research too. And it's letting go of all the things you should do and instead being more free in thinking about it in more playful ways. And that can happen through poetry. So that was, if you're interested in that, that's another article. Collaborative found poetry. Now, the research paper, I'm only going to introduce you to it. I'm going to be presenting it on Wednesday morning in one of the student classes if you want to see it in action. But I wanted to share it with you here to give you an example of these tools that I just introduced to you: the reciprocal interviewing, the peer written response template, and the peer video response with the curiosity memo. And I have found this to be one of the most enlightening, useful, productive ways to help students to launch their research papers. And I even found this video, which you can look at later, which was actually from teaching this class asynchronous, and it walks you through the prompts. What it is basically, it's a perpetual prompt where you ask students to start writing, free writing of what they're interested in. They share it with their peers. They write inside of each other's writing, offering feedback. And then they turn back to their paper and write again. Because students really have a hard time starting a paper. They get the writer's block. And this could be for a secondary ed teacher, or it can be for a higher ed classroom. I've also had good success with doing haikus, the Japanese 17-syllable poem, where I ask them then to take turns with a peer, trying to capture what is their topic and why they chose it. Again, it's like really quick and really brief and concise and beautiful. And it gets them out of all of that verbalness of the long narrative and getting stuck in the research. So I do these in different classes. Each time that I'm teaching, we move on to a different activity, always with these polyvocal conversations, always with getting inside of each other's research. This was Sarah's haiku. She's an English secondary ed teacher, and her research was how to have students choose their own vocabulary words. And she writes it from the perspective of the students, what her work is and why it's important. I want to decide, why can't I make a choice too? And having taught self-study research to master level students as well as doctoral, but particularly in master students who are working in classrooms, this idea of choice is so powerful for students to be able to choose, having their students choose what they want to do as a topic. And she captures that in her thesis. But it's not limited only to students. This is my colleague, Megan, Japanese, a faculty at University of Iceland, just got tenure. And this is an article that she wrote in a co-edited special issue journal that Kathleen and I just did in 2022. And she is both Japanese and Icelandic. So she's a hybrid educator, and with courage for a challenge, the cherry trees blossom. And so it also has powerful implications for professional identity for faculty, haiku, and sharing it with others again. And last, the artifact, which I referred to earlier, this is an artifact of a kaleidoscope, a blended learning of actually somebody who's not in teacher ed. She's a research evaluator. She goes into groups, firms, and helps them to, and she conducts an evaluation of their progress, right? This is Deanna Kelly Winstead, and her work is in my 2011 book, and it is the blending of her personal and professional colleagues and her thinking about exploring collaboration through self-study in a research firm. You don't have to be an artist to make a picture, and I've had some amazing pictures and paintings even that students have done. One that brought in one that was as long as this table. I was so amazed. Again, you give students a choice of a presentation, and you give them the opportunity to co-create and to use alternative methods. You'll be surprised at the progress they will make. And along with the artifact, I like to do this curiosity memo because, I see my young 2.5-year-old granddaughter, Thalia, and I see that curiosity in the whys, right? Why this, Yaya? Why that? And what happens to that when we get older and when we are faculty, right? So what is your curiosity about? And what does your artifact represent? What do you want to know more about? Tell us. why should anybody care? And then again, exchange in a video response. And so hers was this kaleidoscope. She actually did an oil painting, as I said, Deanna. And her beliefs and her collaboration and her experience with coworkers and classmates. And it was a connection of the two parts of her life, hence the colorful, well-blended painting. Very simple, very on point. And summary of that, these are the tools of conversation that polyvocal learning conversations that I shared with you today. I hope they've been practical, useful, and again, based in theory, but enacted pedagogically, the reciprocal interviewing, the response template written, and also in video. And those are the two pieces, both the faculty and the students, that have really been the heart of much of my work. And I hope you understand and have an opportunity now to see that these deep conversations about the why of what we do is so very important. Instead of the busyness of just getting the lesson and getting the students to getting at the end of your lesson because you made it and that's all that matters, right? But why this lesson, and why is it working or not working for you? And how could knocking on the door of a colleague and asking them to come in and give you feedback help you, and then in turn for you to help them? As you co-experiment, as you communicate new ideas and plans and progress and challenges, as you co-creatively explore innovative methods in data gathering, analysis, and presentation. So it has purpose, and I'm going to leave you not only with your artifact homework, but also for you to hopefully take this up and think about adapting these strategies with colleagues and students, and asking you, what if you worked with critical friends in a faculty self-learning community through your center? What would that look like for you? And how could you get that started? So I'll leave you with those two thoughts, hopefully some inspiration. And again, with acknowledgements to so many, the Erasmus program, the Ionian University, George Mason. And actually this work, as you know, started way back when Yanis Katas and I went to the summit, along with Anastasia Katsantis, who I know, my dear colleague who visited you here. We went as delegates, Anastasia, the other Anastasia, who's also Greek American, also in the same program and the same department as I am, coincidentally. But this collaboration began with the International Academic Program, and of course with your wonderful Greek Ministry of Education, Religious Affairs, and Fulbright of Greece. And we served as delegates. Anastasia had come here. I had gone to 4 universities in Thessaloniki. And right now, like you have, we have MOUs with both you and 2 other universities. So again, my work matters to helping to promote and support the work of my culture. And I hope that it's been useful to you. Thank you so very much. I appreciate your interest in this work. And if you have questions, I am happy to address those. You can email me. Thank you. And thank you again to the center, Katerina, who did a lot of coordination and making this happen. Thank you again. I'm very grateful. That's all.
Thank you, Anastasia, for this inspiring lecture. I will try this with the words that you proposed, but not with the drawings, because I don't feel secure to tell you the truth. But it was really interesting. Are there any questions? We can stop recording for now. And I think that if you have questions, they can find you in Corfu. It is a pleasure to have you in Corfu.